Now it's, oh, there it is. Okay, great. If everybody could take your seats, that would be great. Uh, I didn't say that, Governor Fay. You did. Okay, okay. Well, welcome back, everybody. I do want to acknowledge the presence of our parliamentarian, um, the famous former parliamentarian, former governor Alex Stevens. He has very graciously agreed to serve as my parliamentarian, and I'm very excited. So let's all welcome Alex.
Out of order.
Okay. So next on the agenda, we have a second read on the volunteer expert stipend policy. And to present that will be Executive Director Tara Nevitt, as well as Chief Equity and Justice Officer Diana Singleton.
All right, thank you, everyone. So to start off, this is back for a second reading. This isn't a bylaw change, so second reading is not required, but in this case, we did a second reading. The materials are at page 51. And just at a high level, this is a policy that would allow a low-income volunteer to be paid a stipend for contributing their expertise to inform and advance the work of the WSBA. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the why, and then I will pass it over to Chief Singleton. Oh, I just forgot your name. Chief Singleton to talk more about the specifics. So a little bit about the why. Part of this is about, the Board of Governors has been working and the organization has been working for a few years towards more equitable decision making. And we have really looked to the Washington state government as a model of what we're trying to achieve here. So the Washington state government branches, including the executive, legislative, and judicial, have taken steps to comply with a law that was passed in 2022, which provided the following. The legislature finds that equitable public policy discussions should include individuals directly impacted by that policy. And in order to do so, the legislature supports removing barriers to participation. The legislature finds that asking community members with lower financial means to volunteer their time and expertise, while state employees and representatives of advocacy organizations receive compensation from their respective agency or organization for their time and experience, ultimately hinders full and open public participation. And as a result, the legislature finds that removing financial barriers for those individuals fosters increased access to government and enriches public policy discussions and decisions, which ultimately leads to more equitable and sustainable policy outcomes. Since Washington State began implementing their community compensation policy to be in compliance with the law, the legislature passed the Nothing About Us Without Us Act in this past 2024 legislative session. The act requires that task forces, work groups, advisory committees include representation from communities and groups directly impacted by the issues those entities are examining. And the new law plays a role in supporting the community compensation law, and again, ultimately is meant to foster equitable and inclusive decision-making. So just to be clear, the bar is not subject to this legislation. We are not required to do this. However, as we've been working towards more equitable decision-making, we've been asking our volunteer entities to apply an equity lens. We've been asking staff to make an equity analysis every time we propose a policy. This is a concrete way that the board can foster a more equitable and inclusive decision making by making sure that as we're asking community folks to participate in our processes, that if they are low income, we are removing barriers to their participation. So with that, I will turn it over to Diana.
Me? Okay. So as folks may recall, we talked about this at the September Board of Governors meeting, and there are a number of different questions in your materials. You saw that we answered your questions, but I just wanted to highlight some of the answers to your questions. But before I do that, just as a refresher, what is this policy exactly? It would be giving stipends to volunteers who fit a particular criteria. And that criteria would be they're a volunteer for either a one-time engagement like a speaker at a CLE or participating in a focus group, or an ongoing engagement as a volunteer with an entity of the bar or administered by the bar. And then the other criteria is that they are low income. So we define low income as a household income less than 400% of the federal poverty level, which is similar to the same criteria as the state government. The person has lived experience that would directly inform the bar's programs, policies, works that we are administering, and that they're not otherwise compensated for their work, meaning that they're not being paid by their employer to serve on a committee or to speak at a CLE. And then I also want to note in the policy, which has been reviewed by our General Counsel office, that it is specifies that the policy shall not be used to favor one viewpoint over another, or to make any types of classifications based on race, national origin, religion, or gender. And then the other piece is that the policy clearly states it does not create an employee-employer relationship between the bar and the individuals receiving the stipends. So in terms of the questions that came up at the September meeting, one question was, have we gotten input from the members? Do people know about this proposed policy? Folks may recall about a little less than a year ago, the Access to Justice Board, when they were doing their research, sent out a survey to all bar entities. So that includes all the committees, councils, sections, in addition to just the larger legal community, which also includes people from the public working for community-based organizations that direct people to legal services. From that survey, we had 273 people participate, and you'll see more specific information from that survey in your materials, but I just wanted to highlight that there were some people who had expressed that they were not in favor of the idea of compensating people with lived experience, but 90% of the people who responded to that survey did not only express their being in favor, but also provided reasons why they would be in favor, which again, that's outlined in your materials. The other question that came up in the September meeting was, if we were to approve this policy, should we fund it through something other than our general fund or our current budget, and instead fund it through grants that we research from other organizations or even our own state bar foundation? We did do some research just to find out what are best practices happening around the country, including our own state, but even beyond. And again, you'll see in the materials some best practices that we researched from even federal agencies, the Health and Human Services. They also have a policy. And the best practice is to, if you're going to do this, to have stable funding that isn't grant-based, because if people have worked in an organization that is mostly grant funded, if you don't get the grant one year, then you're out of luck. And so we recommend to not use grant or to pursue grant funds. And then also, just practically speaking, it would take staff time to do the research, to find the grants, to apply for the grants, to monitor the grants, and to report on that. So that's the reason why we don't recommend funding if you were to approve this proposal, to fund it with grant funds. Another question was, should we pilot this policy? It's new, is this something maybe we should just dip our toe in? We got a lot of great feedback from staff who are thinking about, if the board were to approve it, what will it look like to implement it? And there was feedback and we also asked, should we pilot it? To do a real pilot, it would take some time, actually 2 to 6 years, to really see how effective it is, because the idea of seeing if this would be effective would start with recruitment. And as folks know, it takes time to recruit people that you're wanting to be at your decision-making table. It requires relationship building, outreach. And then if you were able to find people that you want to serve in these volunteer roles, then you would need time for them to actually serve and to determine that impact. So all that to say is doing a pilot would mean just a few entities would be able to potentially benefit from this for a long period of time. And so we recommend, if just not piloting it, deciding whether to adopt it or not, and then maybe to set a time in 5 or 6 years to evaluate whether it is making the impact. And at that point, you can decide, to terminate the policy or to keep it going. And then the last question that was asked is, if it were approved, how would it be funded? Again, in the materials, Director Lynch has reminded us that we use GAAP accounting. Can't remember what that acronym stands for. Tiffany can remind me. But it basically means we would be funding the stipends coming from one of the four funds, depending on what group that the volunteer expert would be assigned to. So the last thing I'll say is, just in terms of if you were to approve the policy, then the staff would determine how do we implement it. In your materials, there are draft proposed procedures. That is a document that's just for your reference. You're not making a decision on the procedures document, because that is something for staff to determine once you, as a policy-making entity, decide whether to move forward. Then the staff would need to figure out how do we operationalize that. The staff has talked briefly about this. If you were to move forward, it is complicated. It will take some time for us to figure out how to make this work, and we estimate it could take 3 to 6 months to figure out how to make it work. And so potentially, if you were to pass it today, we would look to figuring out how to implement it to potentially be in line with the budget planning season for FY26. And then the last thing I'll say is, has anyone else given their input since this has been in the board materials? At the last meeting, 2 members from our Access to Justice Board shared their input. We did get a written comment, and just one written comment, from the Council on Public Defense late on Monday. So you haven't had a chance to see it. So I did want to share with you what they had wanted you to know for their input. I won't read the entire thing, but I wanted to highlight that, as you know, the Council on Public Defense does a lot of work to update the public defense caseloads. They also provide advice and training for public defenders. And then this is what they said. We rely heavily on volunteer expertise of both lawyers and other subject matter experts for our subcommittees. Last year, many volunteers contributed over 100 hours to CPD work. Many of our attorney volunteers were able to give time to the CPD within their salaried hours. However, our other subject matter expert volunteers were not compensated for their time. In one case, a volunteer was required to use paid time off, PTO, to attend meetings during work hours. In essence, the volunteer paid to participate on CPD. Some of the subcommittees have sought input from litigants and parents in the dependency system or defendants in the legal system, but without compensation. The CPD has been unable to attract these experts given the time-intensive nature of the work and the lack of financial support. With the ability to provide stipends, we could create a more inclusive, interdisciplinary space that centers our work on those directly impacted by these policies. Policies affecting low-income individuals and families, such as indigent public defense, should be informed by the insights of those same communities. People closest to the problems have invaluable perspectives that are essential for crafting equitable and effective solutions. So the CPD shared that they would be very much in favor of this policy, as it would help advance the work that they're doing. So I'm going to end here and turn it over to President Angeville to see if there are any questions or comments.
Thank you, Chief Singleton, and thank you, Executive Director Nevitt. Are there any questions, comments for our presenters? Governor Fay.
I'm going to go back to the optics of what we are looking at here. We have just told our members we're going to nick you for $10 more a month. And what are we going to do with it? We're going to give it to people selected by the staff for, what can I say? I imagine a number of our members will have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just accidentally misspoke, but just to clarify the record, $10 a year, not $10 a month. And also, I don't believe that the staff will select these folks. They'll be appointed by the committees. So that's volunteers, the board. We would only be validating that they qualify.
That would be even worse.
Governor Ahern.
3 points. First, I thought Diana and crew, you did a great job putting this together, answering the questions, all that kind of fun stuff. Second, I hope that, I'm assuming this is going to pass, but when it does, I hope that the Keller and Janice defense is put in writing ahead of time rather than our having to explain it away later. And then for reasons I'm happy to explain to anyone not on the record, I'm going to abstain from this vote.
Governor Arneson.
Thank you. Thank you for all this work that you put in, Director Singleton and your team. In concept, I'm in favor of paying volunteers for their time and for their individual expertise. I think someone mentioned folks who are not attorneys have to take PTO. I would say anybody working for a state agency, I can speak with experience, also cannot do this work on state time, and so has to use PTO to do these things. So in concept, in theory, I am in favor of this. I have a couple comments. One, I have the same concern as Director Fay, that at the same board meeting that we raise fees, that then we suggest a new way to spend folks' money. The second thing is I think that the estimates in the materials, I worry that they're a little low in terms of the number of people who would qualify for this. The average income in my district is $72,000 for a two-person family. So more than half of the folks in my district would qualify for this. So I'm concerned that the cost of it could be a lot higher than what is estimated in the materials. Thank you.
Governor Couch.
I guess my curiosity on this is we have the ability to hire experts to give us advice on things whenever we need to. So in that level, I see this as like a very obvious, like, sure, we are allowed to hire experts, but that also leads me to the question of, I guess, if we're worried about optics, why are we having a policy saying you're allowed to hire experts to give you insight on things that you need expertise on, instead of just, we already do that and have that policy? Is it about building a community where this is part of what we do regularly? In which case, I'm curious to see like how this is going to be used and who's using this. Because as I look at this, it really is just like confirming a specific subset of something we already have the ability to do whenever we need to for whatever we need to do. If we're worried about optics, I'm not sure that this specifically adds value, and I'm curious to kind of hear people's perspective on who are opposed to this too, like how this is different than hiring any other expert. What's the problem? We're hiring experts. We do that.
I'll take a little bit of a stab at it and also see if I think it's an interesting question. We certainly do hire experts. I think, largely what we're thinking about here is how do we include the people that are most impacted by the policy decisions that we make? Often when we hire experts, and I think that's more of that's an equity-minded way to think about things. Historically, when we hire experts, we're not necessarily thinking about it from an equity perspective. We're thinking about, more traditional forms of expertise. Like we hire someone who's an expert in real estate to advise us about the building, or we hire a financial expert to help us with our investments. And so I think where this approach to equitable decision-making is leading us is to realizing that there are other things that we don't know and that we do need expert advice about. I think it is an interesting question whether we could go out and hire for that the way we do other experts. My guess is it would cost a lot more than what's being proposed here. And I do think it is a little bit what you said, Jordan, that part of it is about trying to spread this throughout all the different levels that policymaking occurs. So I think the way we've thought about it is rather than going out and hiring an expert, what we're thinking about is making sure that the entities that are ideating and proposing things have the people at the table who have information that they don't have. And we're recognizing that some of those folks, but not all, might have financial barriers. And if they have financial barriers, we would like to eliminate those barriers. So that's my initial thought. I don't know if you want to add anything, Diana.
I don't think I have much to add. And I think, I really look to what the state government is doing because and how they went from their law in 2022 to compensating people to their law this past legislation to requiring you have members of the public who are going to be impacting by your decision at the decision-making table. And so I think the state government is trying to communicate we are making decisions, and it may feel like it's just about the legal profession, but ultimately we're serving the public. And so if we were to put out an announcement, we're hiring experts, I think many people, particularly folks who experience poverty, don't think of themselves as expert that might not, put a proposal if we put an RFP. And so I think the idea behind this is how do we bring people to the table who are most impacted by the decisions that are being made, and then removing those barriers. If you look in the memo from that survey, we had asked people, what are the barriers that you encounter to volunteering with the Bar Association? Financial barrier was one of the top ones, but other barriers as well, childcare, technology, the time that you're having the meeting. So there are other barriers, but this is one step towards removing those barriers and really looking to our state government as a model of what they've been doing over the last few years.
Thank you, Chief Singleton. Governor Larry, and then Nancy Hawkins. And then Brent Williams-Ruth.
So I know I'm the one who brought up this alternate funding and the foundation, and I appreciate you put in some information about that. I also feel like the foundation hasn't even been asked, and they do give a steady amount of money to the bar for different programs every single year. So maybe they should be able to decide if they want to put that money elsewhere. And before we could say yes, I think even just exploring that to have a firm, if they say no, then we have that option. But not even to ask and see if that is something that they would be willing to fund, I think is kind of a missed opportunity. And I think that is something we need to try before we move forward with trying to do it this way.
Yes, go ahead, Executive Director Nevitt.
I think that's a fair point, and we did discuss this. I did briefly mention it to the officers of the foundation at our officers meeting. I think ultimately, because I had some concerns about the approach, I wasn't sure that I was the right messenger. I think we are not foreclosed from having that conversation, but I think it would be helpful to have the directive of the board to make the ask, and or to have someone from the board who could be a good advocate for this to help me address the foundation board. So I don't think we're foreclosed from it. I would love for you to join and make that ask.
Governor Williams-Ruth, and then Nancy Hawkins.
Oh, thank you. And I didn't mean to jump in front of Nancy just to be added to the queue. The equity analysis is relatively new to our world for members of the board who have come on in the last couple of years. It was something that was just passed 3 years ago, about 3 years ago. And again, it's meant to reflect our values and the charge from the court and our GR 12 compliance that DEI is, and I know I use the acronym of, it's the forbidden acronym, sorry. DEI, DEI, DEI. It's part of our charge. It's what the court wants us to do. It has been mandated as part and germane activities for this bar. It's why we had dinner with our affinity bar members last night. And I'm sure Diana hasn't gotten Bonnie's notes from table 1, but we had Michelle Sue, who is the president of CABA, that was there. And as we were wrapping up our conversation, there was the question of, the last question on the little blue table tent was, what do you think may be missing? And she said something that had not been discussed at all. And I was just like, wow, you've blown my mind. For all the conversations that we've had about this, no one has made that point. And that is why it's important, nay, critical, to have the people impacted by the decisions at the table. Now, to address Governor Arneson, Arneson's concern. A committee is going to have 1 or 2 spots. I mean, the fact that there may be 10,000 people in her district that would qualify doesn't mean 10,000 people are going to be paid to give their opinion. It's going to be people seeking an appointment. The nominations committee will have to go through or however it's going to get done. That is so I am not concerned about the totality of people. It's the reality that we should not be a echo chamber of those who can choose to serve and volunteer, giving up whatever financial impact there is on their life, to those who don't even have that choice. And the fact is that even with this, and wherever the funding comes from, and I would support a motion that says that we support this with the instruction to look for funding sources, knowing that the backstop to avoid what Chief Singleton said is the whiplash of 1 year we get a grant, the next year we don't, is to make sure that the voice at the table is someone that can speak and bring up that one topic that no one else had even thought about. Because the fact that, I mean, a state legislative issue is childcare. And there was a tussle, if you will, amongst the Democratic caucus members, because there were some very affluent members of the caucus who were making decisions about what they believe childcare needs are for lower income folks in different scenarios and different zip codes. And then basically got confronted with the reality of people who've lived it, that actually are now current members of the legislature, that are in those positions. And like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And what you're proposing wouldn't solve or fix the issue. And guess what? Amongst the hurt feelings and anger amongst them, they still then went back and recreated something because there was that voice. I support this not because the fact that we're going to take someone from living in poverty and putting them in Medina, but because maybe we're going to give them enough that they're going to say, you know what, I have a voice, I want to use it, and this helps me bridge the gap of the expensive need to, and the privilege to be able to come and sit in this room, to be online, and to participate in conversations like this with those different entities that are doing this work. Thank you.
Nancy Hawkins, and then Governor Bloom.
Thanks. I read all this carefully, and I'm speaking on my own, not representing my section. But the purpose is to hope that we would get more information from someone impacted by a particular position, or someone who might have other ideas, whether they're willing to speak up or not, but at least they'll probably vote on different proposals. Some people, it takes a while. It takes even people on the board who are experienced litigators a while before they're willing to speak up at a Board of Governors meeting, because it's pretty overwhelming. And if someone was faced with comment, when you look around the room at the Board of Governors, there's an awful lot of people here who are practicing lawyers or used to be, who bill out at more money than most low-income people have ever seen in a month, let alone see it for a week. And so I would not want to see these people with lived experience called experts, because they're not really experts yet. They're knowledgeable about their own lives, and that's what we want to know that's what we want to hear from them in various discussions, and not put a title on them, which frankly seems a little condescending, to say, okay, you're low income, that makes you an expert. You know, it might make you knowledgeable about how to juggle some money, a small amount of money between your bills, but it doesn't make you an expert necessarily on an entire subject area. And it sounds more like we would be using that phrase to make ourselves feel less guilty about the fact that, you know, we may bill out at $250 or $350 or apparently $850 an hour, whereas somebody else is living on public assistance or minimum wage. And I would also want to be sure that we didn't insist that a person who fulfilled one of these roles had to speak up. Because like I said, it takes a lot to have those skills and that confidence to do that. And I'm mindful of what it was like, for me, decades ago, when in another organization, somebody said, well, we need to get more gay people on the board so that they can speak up on gay issues. And it would be the same, of course, for people of color. When speaking up on gay issues or racial issues or religious discrimination issues is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of someone who falls into that category. But we have to be accepting that sometimes people are afraid to speak up. You know, someone lives in a housing situation that can be lost if they are considered too, for want of a better phrase, too mouthy, you know, too assertive, that they might lose their low-income housing. They might not be comfortable yet speaking up at a meeting like one of ours. So we need to be mindful of what we want from these people that would fulfill these roles and what how they benefit from it as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. Governor Bloom. Oh, and then Chief Singleton.
Yeah, I thank Nancy for her observations and have really gotten some important feedback. It seems like from all of the governors who've spoken so far. Clearly, a lot of really cogent and relevant remarks and thoughts on the subject matter. You know, based on a previous agenda item, you know, I'd heard some things about different folks that, you know, I may not have known before. Something y'all may not have known before about me. Once upon a time, I had to pay my rent in installments during the course of a month because I didn't have two nickels to rub together to pay my whole rent one time, you know, at one time. You know, I've had to stand before a judge in a courtroom and not as a counsel. Okay. So, you know, I personally have had some hardship. You know, I've been separated from my family for many months at on end and things like that. Right. I've been in, you know, danger and harm, you know, harm's way, hazardous duty. So, you know, I myself, who, you know, would otherwise be unremarkable, is you're not the kind of guy we want to hear from, Todd. You know, step back kind of guy. You know, and so even I have some relevant experiences and things that I can, you know, offer from my own experience. Yeah, I might have to dredge it up from several years ago, maybe, or decades ago, even perhaps potentially. But you know, I mean, I don't know if y'all know, but I mean, I'm not comparing myself to other folks, but I am a 90% disabled veteran under the VA. So yeah, I've got some disability and I've got some experience with it too, right? I may not be walking around and showing it off and parading it, if you will, to folks intentionally all the time. But you know, I just thought I'd kind of bring it up that sometimes appearances are deceiving. Oftentimes they're deceiving. You think about people who have invisible disabilities, maybe they've had cancer and they've got some unseen disability or something like that, right? But yet if they put on clothes and they don't bitch and moan and pretend like, and show, what they're really feeling or experiencing on a moment by moment basis, we think there's nothing wrong with them. They're just a normal person. So, we can just assume, whatever when we see them, right? Folks are a lot more complicated than they appear on the surface. And we've got a lot of this. We've had the benefits of a number of folks who meet these kinds of things, whether it's, and a lot of us have been impoverished, whether it was in college or high school or whenever, growing up as a kid or whatever kind of thing. And a lot of us have overcome that and don't experience that anymore. But, I think that, a lot of times folks look at me and say, well, hey, there's a guy with privilege. And, in reality, it's a guy who had, 30 plus years with some pretty decent decisions made and some kind of choices that I made in life that, I'm not on Skid Row. I'm not on the street. I'm not, strung out on drugs or whatever, what have you. Okay. So, that's, and I'm not kind of casting aspersions. I'm certainly not casting aspersions because I've been there, a lot of these different things. I've had, some negative feedback along the way, shall we say, right? So I find it interesting. The one thing, we talk about expertise, and I think it was, certainly reflect on Nancy's comment about, well, would we really call this expertise that we're seeking? It's a perspective, but a lot of us already have this perspective. A lot of us, the reason we're here is we have this perspective. Anybody who's here are self-selecting. And in fact, I really got some issues with some of the surveys that we do. I mean, I don't know what the total number of surveys that we found, but I get so many surveys and I'm like, I either start looking and I'm like, these questions don't even make sense to me. How does this even, how's this even relevant to what, the survey purports to be about? Forget it, and I dismiss it. And I just, and so anybody who's actually responded to that is self-selecting. They're saying, I got a beef with whatever the subject matter of this survey is. So therefore I'm going to pipe up and I'm going to make my voice heard. And that's great. I mean, it's an opportunity for folks to give feedback. But if we just accept that as, well, that's what our members told us. Well, you may have 0.1% of the membership saying that, and those are the people who self-selected because that they've got a perspective on that issue and they want to be heard and they want it to ring out. So I think that sometimes when we say, well, we've got member surveys on this, that, or the other thing, that all we've really got is we've got the people who have an axe to grind on that particular subject are jumping up and saying, yeah, here's what we ought to do. And the good idea fairies, but then they turn around and it's like, well, I don't have time to do that, or it's too much to get involved with, or I can't, can't burn up my PTO doing that stuff. I'd rather spend it with my family or doing whatever else, right? That's priority in reality, right? And so, we all make choices. We all prioritize what we do. And whether it's, to spend time to say, hey, we need to make the bar a better place. We need to make the state a better place. And I can do that by getting involved in the bar and engaging, that's great. But, and so that's essentially what we're going to be looking at when we say, here's some volunteers. Oh, and by the way, it'd really be cool if they could get paid for it because, they're in a situation. Well, we could walk down on the street and we could grab somebody by the collar and say, hey, we need some input. Come on up, And if we gave them $10, hey, they were paying a volunteer, we've got some perspective, right? I mean, in reality, it just seems to me as though anybody that we're purporting that would potentially fall into this, we're essentially paying them for their opinion, and they've already got an opinion already formed, and they're going to come in and they're going to tell us what that is. And so to think that, we're getting lived experience and this is expertise because it's unique, and this person has an understanding of the quote unquote affected community or whatever. The reality is we've all got some expertise and some feedback and some on different points of it. And so we're getting that all already through our kind of own membership. And so I just am a skeptic, shall we say. And I thought that it was interesting because we're all self-selected and we're all here. A lot of us are aligned on a lot of things. And unfortunately, a phrase that Governor Williams-Ruth used, echo chamber. I feel that way a lot. We just bounce around and hear the same thing. And as long as we're hearing the same thing, I. we're all online, so, let's just go ahead and line it up and do it then. So I'm concerned about the echo chamber, and I'm concerned all we're going to do is get some more that's just going to reinforce whatever's coming back on the surveys that doesn't really reflect what our members think, and we're not really doing a service to the member. And if we're doing it when we're telling them we're raising dues to Governor Arneson and Governor Faye's points, I think it just alienates our memberships and makes it, that much harder for us to kind of to really serve our members, should we say. So just some observations and my thoughts on the subject.
Thank you. Chief Singleton, and then Executive Director Nevitt, and then Governor Arneson and Alex Stevens, the parliamentarian.
So am I next? Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to address a couple things. I think Governor Bloom and Nancy had asked about the term expert. And just again, going back to this is not this new idea that we're the only ones thinking of doing this. We thankfully have models to look at, including our own judicial branch, the Supreme Court and the Administrative Office of the Courts. So we've really looked closely at the policies that they've created and their procedures. And so they're the ones that we got the idea called the Lived Experience Expert, Lee, and that's what's described in the policy. And the reason why, in talking to staff at AOC who's implementing this policy, the reason why they have, I think, used this term is, practically speaking, when they pay people, they pay them as an independent contractor. And so that's why they have created this term. So I just wanted to share why we have suggested the word expert in it. I think, to many people's points, we're all experts in a variety of things. And then I also wanted to maybe address what Governor Bloom was saying is self-selecting, or just, grabbing someone off the street. The idea behind this isn't to discount anyone who's already a volunteer, who's at this table. Everybody has perspectives to bring. It's really thinking about who's not at the table and what are the reasons why they're not at the table. And I think that's why the state legislature passed the law 2 years ago, and the recent law earlier this year is, how do we get the people who are not at the table, who are going to be impacted by the decisions that we're making? And they actually made it a requirement for some of these state agencies to have those people at the table. So it's really getting to who's not at the table, and less about like, well, I'm not being paid and my perspective's not valued. It's, your perspectives are valued. We just need the perspectives of people who aren't at the table. And I'm reminded every day of what the mission of the bar is, which is to serve the members, but it's also to serve the public. And that has been a big question mark, honestly. I mean, sure, maybe you go on the sidewalk and ask people, but how do we get people who can invest time at the table, learning about the decisions we're making, being a part of the decision making, and it's getting to the brass tacks of removing those barriers. And then the last thing I was going to just say is about the optics that people have mentioned. You just voted to increase by $10 a year. And I think it's to continue to invest in our bar association, in fulfilling our mission, in improving the legal profession, improving the legal system. And in my mind, that's an amazing investment. And being able to bring people who are impacted by your decisions and the decisions of our volunteers to the table is basically, to me, they seem consistent. It's not like, oh, you're paying $10, so we could pay somebody else who's not at the table to be here. It's, you're paying $10, so you're investing in this profession so that we are serving the public and ensuring the integrity of our bar and your decision making. So to me, it doesn't seem they're antithetical. They seem very much consistent with each other.
Thank you, Chief Singleton. Executive Director Nevitt.
Well, I think Diana said it very well, some of what I wanted to say, but I'll just underline a couple things. One thing I really wanted to point out is that the point of the policy is not to recruit people who have a specific identity or a specific viewpoint. And, this is a concern that's been raised. And I really want to point to the language in the policy and the procedure that the policy shall not be used to favor one viewpoint over another, or to make classifications based on race, national origin, religion, or gender. So it really is about making sure that we can make good policy. I just want to give an example of the kind of place where I think this could have been really useful. So a few years ago, we had a task force that was looking at mandatory malpractice. And I think, and it would have been great to be able to have somebody on that task force who maybe had been a victim of malpractice and had an experience with that. And we did actually have a gentleman who came to a lot of the meetings, but and so the point is that we want to think about people who are not at the table, as Diana said, who can augment the existing knowledge that we bring. And if they have a barrier to participation that's financial, this is a way that we can address that barrier.
Vins and then Governor Arneson.
So another one of my hats, if you will, is that I sit on the DEI Council. But I wanted to kind of speak to some of the things that I've heard and I'm troubled about. So I'm a kid from Miami, Florida, from Overtown, from the major ghetto area where there are a lot of riots. But I then went to undergraduate school and I then went to law school. And while I have a number of certain thoughts and beliefs regarding poverty, I would not presume at all at this time in my life to be a spokesperson on those issues. Because I'm far removed from it, and actually, in a lot of ways, the issues are even worse. I see this policy, so I'm saying, please don't insult folks. This is not about just rounding somebody up and saying, come on, we just want your opinion. I think there's a process in which somebody says, this person has lived experience. And I hope, Chief Singleton, you will fill this out, because a lot of times the folks that we're talking about are also still in the fight regarding the issues that they are being called on to be a part of. And they are not singular. They are working with people like themselves on a number of issues, and they've been doing it for years, but they still are actually people who are directly impacted. And those people, in many cases, or a number of the people, in many cases, just can't afford to give the time to show up. They're already volunteering on other things, but they just can't just keep doing that. And especially doing that at the risk of their job, at the risk of making money so that they can keep a roof over their heads, et cetera, et cetera. And so a number of those people who would be very, very valuable to the discussion, they opt out because they can't afford to spend the time that a number of us can spend. And so we don't hear from them. I think about other committees where you might have juveniles, and we're talking about juvenile justice, and there are no juveniles at the table. The people who are the most impacted aren't there. And they aren't there not because they don't want to be, but they are not there because they don't know how they could be and deal with all the other things they're dealing with. And again, a number of those folks are working with other juveniles on a number of these issues. Now, perhaps, and I don't know what y'all are going to do, but if you choose not to pass this, hopefully you will pilot it. Because I think in some ways we can see how it works, even though if I understand you correctly, the OAC has already done some of this kind of stuff. But I just want to, I just wanted to speak to that. Because even with whatever this stipend might be, they're not gonna make money on it. They're not gonna make money on us. And they're not hustling to do that. It is at best a incentive to ask them to participate and give more time. And oh, by the way, they're doing it to actually also help our members who are trying to do the right thing. And are also trying to do it in a way where all voices are heard before our members then say that we, the bar, this bar committee or that bar committee should go down this path and eventually circle back around to this very table to get approval to do it. But I think it certainly helps to make sure some of the voices that are often not at the table, we do the best we can to bring them to the table and have them participate. Thanks.
Thank you. And I am mindful of the time. We are going to take Governor Arneson, and then I think we're going to break. Because I don't want to sort of shortchange this discussion. So please go ahead.
Okay,
Governor
I'll be
Arneson.
quick. I just to reiterate, I am not opposed to the idea of this and the purpose of it. I think it's very important. I think there are voices that have been left out for generations, and this won't solve everything, but it's a step in the right direction. My comments are just that our goal is to decrease the barriers to people participating who otherwise would, but have a concrete reason why they're not. It sounds like from this survey, a bigger issue by a couple percentage points was the time and location of meetings, more so than money. I'm wondering if we have addressed that or have plans to address that, since that was reported as being a bigger concern than money. Not by much, but it's there. And it's something, frankly, that I hear from folks in my district that, it takes me a long time. It takes Francis and folks a long time to get here to do these things. And we're happy to do that, but a lot of other folks aren't. When I was younger and I was part of the young lawyers, there were things I wanted to participate in and things I wanted to volunteer for that I could not because I had 3 young kids. It was just not possible. This amount of money probably wouldn't have made the difference because it doesn't even pay for a day of childcare. But but it is a start and it's important. What is causing me concern though is that I do feel like this is going to qualify a lot more people than we think that it will. I don't think that the numbers in the materials are going. I think in reality we're going to see a whole lot more people saying that they qualify for this, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I want us to go into it with eyes wide open on how much it's going to cost. And I'm uncomfortable doing that. I'm uncomfortable adopting something for an undefined amount of funds when we have not exhausted, it sounds like we have not exhausted all of our options for alternative funding. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to break for lunch and we'll be back at 1 o'clock. Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had a good lunch. We were discussing the issue of the stipend before we broke, but we do have a guest here who is going to give us a presentation. So I just want to get a show of hands if you folks think we need further discussion on the stipend issue. And I'm seeing nodding. Versus just taking action right away. What do people think? No, there's no motion yet. There's no motion yet. So should we defer it then, discussion for later on?
I move to approve the recommendations.
Okay. All right. Any discussion about the motion? No, to approve the recommendation. Anyone want to discuss this or are we ready to go to vote?
Okay. On the motion to approve the recommendation for the lived experience stipend, Tom Ahern, Emily Arneson,
No.
Matthew Dresden,
No.
Nam Nguyen, Brent Williams Ruth,
Aye.
Christina Larry,
No.
Kevin Fay,
No.
Kari Petrasik.
Aye.
Todd Bloom,
Negative.
Allison Whitney,
No.
Mary Rathbone,
No.
Jordan Couch,
Aye.
Harvin Price,
No.
Elaine Villeneuve.
No.
All right, motion fails. 9-3 with 2 abstentions.